It's a Wednesday again, and you know what, Pete? Last time I said it was Welcome Wednesday. This time it's Wellness Wednesday, and we are going to welcome one of our favorite guests. We've had him on a few times. I just love listening to this guy, and I'm going to say something that maybe a little obscure, and somebody would say craziness, but listening to him talk, listening to his philosophy, he's lived it. He's living through it himself. Now he's dealing with obviously the anxieties, the pains, the alcohol, the drugs, all that sort of stuff that comes with the field he's in. I honestly say the first time I spoke to this young man, if I had him through the trials and tribulations with my sister, I honestly believe we could have found a way to keep her on the planet. That's how much respect I have for him, and that's why I love listening to him when he talks. He's so articulate. I don't even know why I get on this panel because you guys, you just rock it. And if you're listening and watching, obviously it's on Fired Up Network. We're with Pete Bombaci, and we've got our very special guest, Stephen Morris, coming on in a few minutes. It's all about social connection, and nobody does it better than Genwell Project, Human Connection Movement. We'll go through some stats. We'll go through some stories. And then, of course, Pete, we'll hear you tell us how to make sure we stay very focused on being socially connected.
Yeah, I'm excited for the show because I think what Stephen Morris brings to this is just a level of expertise that everyone needs to be hearing right now as we go through these ups and downs and through the phases of COVID-19, and really looking forward to diving in to the impact it's having on young people, older people, and frankly, all of us. It doesn't matter what your age is. Somebody's going through some challenges out there, and I think most importantly that we can all be part of the solution by reaching out and supporting one another. So,
Well, Sam Trapoline's already saying, good morning, gents. He's a big fan of the show and a big fan of Pete Bombaci. Hey, listen, don't forget we are on Fired Up Network. We are on well over 150 podcasts. They have done such a great job in spreading the news. We'll only get bigger and better over the winter, of course, as we go back indoors. Our cast and crew of fans will be back with us, of course. But right now, as we get back and get ready for school, there's obviously stresses and anxieties, and parents are out on the Huskies trying to get everything together. And I know that Stephen Morris will enlighten us on with this new variant hovering over our head. What are the effects we're going to have as we go through? Just before we bring him up, I wanted to ask you, how are things going with the Genwell Project? I know that you've done a bunch of surveys. I know we're going to talk a little bit about that with Stephen. How are things been this last couple of days?
Since we last chatted, I think things have gone well. We had a great meeting with the Canadian Red Cross today, talking about the work that they're doing in regards to social connection across this country, certainly through the lens of volunteerism, Meals on Wheels, and a lot of the different programs in place for people with probably disabilities, seniors, lack of mobility. But working through, we're doing a lot of different podcasts, sharing the message around the world. And we've got a couple webinars coming up. One is the rollout of our results, which is coming up on the 16th of September. And people can head over to the Genwell Project to hear more about that, or actually to the togetherness.hub.org, which is a global organization that's bringing people, thought leaders in the space of human connection together. And another thing we just set up, Carrie, which I'm really excited about, is called the Coffee Chat, Connecting the Connectors. And what is we're doing a coffee every other Wednesday. It's 9 o'clock on the West Coast, noon here, and 6 o'clock in Europe. And the whole idea is all these people that have been championing the human connection movement, whether it's through the Genwell Project, through apps they're developing, through different types of tools that they're working on, and programs from the Campaign to End Loneliness in the UK, the Coalition to End Loneliness in the US. There's a campaign in Australia, and also the Genwell Project. And even, and we should be bringing you to the table too, because...
Absolutely. I got it. Hey, I brought my coffee cup.
And this is why the reason is because this hasn't been an easy journey, as you know, Carrie. And I can speak to the global campaigns around the world. A lot of them haven't received funding from government at this point. There isn't been a lot of funding put towards dealing with the issue of isolation and loneliness. And we have this freight train coming. We'll talk about it a bit tonight in the context of COVID and post-COVID, but this issue was growing long before the global pandemic. the isolation and loneliness that we fear. And there's a lot of people have been in this for a few years, and it's been a tough, hard slog. And just by bringing people together every couple of weeks, we believe we can actually rally the troops and give everybody a little burst of steam as we push forward into the next couple of years, when I think people will finally start paying attention to what we're trying to do here.
Pete, sign me up. Make sure it's no longer a Tim Hortons double. I'm going with one sugar only because I'm trying to lose weight.
Cutting
Hey,
back.
listen,
Nice work.
enough about you, enough about me. One of our favorites, Stephen Morris.
Hey guys, nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me on again. I always love the conversation, particularly looking forward to this one. I've got my 3 kids going back to school starting tomorrow, so it's going to be interesting times and very challenging, I think, for a lot of different people. But thanks a lot for having me. Really appreciate it.
Hey, what happened to the brick wall?
You know what? When I was setting up today, I thought, I wonder if they're going to mention that I've got the brick wall behind me. That's hilarious.
Well done, Pete. Well done. Well, you know what?
A shift of camera angle. Let's just put it that way.
I figured he's trying to set up that classroom setting with the chalkboard behind him or the white write-on board. Or
I'll bring the brick wall.
All right, there we go. Now I feel at home now.
I feel like I'm at a brick. Hey, listen, it's great to have you on. It's fantastic. I see that Robert Wine has joined us. Obviously, Sam Trapolino from Australia. Thank you. And I was just telling Pete, Stephen, this is now, we're dealing with a network called Fired Up Network. They came to us and wanted to get it out more. We're at 150 podcasts around the world. It's absolutely amazing. And as we go forward in the winter, we know that talks with you are probably going to become more and more needed, because I know that we're looking at things that are certainly changing. And I want to get right into it. My wife is working at an academy not too far from here in Thornhill. And she was telling me today that the atmosphere, the excitement, the optimism was unbelievable. And I wanted to ask you to get it started off with this variant and this fourth wave hovering over of us. Is this a optimism we have to go in cautiously, or should we be euphoric and say, you know what, we're through it, let's see what we can do with it?
I think you've got to obviously looking at it from an emotional point of view, which is the way that I always look at this stuff. The work that I do being a psychotherapist, I'm always trying to look at what the real emotions that people are dealing with underneath the surface, build those awareness for those emotions, understand why we're feeling that way. And I think going into these particular situations playing out the way that they possibly could, there's got to be, obviously there's going to be that optimism that you're talking about. There's going to be that tendency to want to really kind of run with this. I know for myself, I was saying before the show that my wife and I are really excited because the kids are going back to school. It gives us the opportunity to kind of let them back in and be with their friends and do all the things that they want to do. But we've also got to be aware of what could happen if there is a pullback by the school system, if there is something that happens as a result of this fourth wave, and what the impact on us could be emotionally around that. I think there's going to be some fear that's underneath the surface around something like that playing out, and fear can do some very interesting things to us when it comes to the way we react in our thought process and behaviorally. But also, like, if something does happen and we do have to pull back, what's the impact on us going to be emotionally around that? I think there's a possibility for us to get into some fear, to get into some sadness, to get into anger as a coping mechanism for those things. So we need to be really aware of how we're doing emotionally and mood-wise in case something like that does play out. Obviously, keeping our fingers crossed that it doesn't play out, but trying to be aware for the way that stuff can build up, because if we're not aware of the emotional state, that's when it catches us unawares and it can really do some damage to us.
Hey, Stephen, a couple questions just on following up on that. Number one, is there something, because we, again, talking before the show, I just was out, getting my son back into a hockey program, and he's obviously going to get really excited and meeting new friends and getting back into the normal, pace of being part of a hockey program.
Right.
So one question is there something to be said, like, do you not build up expectations? Do you not get them back into that normal routine in case that we do get back into a lockdown, and it almost, and I'll use the phrase breaks their heart
Right.
that, they had a taste of it and then it was taken away. And then secondly, to your comment you were just making there, if we're prepping for the sadness and we're prepping for the anger, what can we do in advance? What can we start doing now? How do we coach ourselves through that potential so that we're prepared for it, so we don't end up in a really bad state emotionally because we're just so disappointed with, with again the potential of getting locked down?
Yeah, it's really. You raise a couple of really good points there, right? One of the biggest things around the preparation piece is really just building an emotional awareness. I think the vast majority of people that I come across, obviously in my line of work, I work predominantly with people who deal with addiction and mental health issues, and trying to build that emotional awareness, because I think a lot of people, I would say the vast majority of people that I meet, not just in my line of work, aren't aware of their emotional experience. So they're not sure what they're going through, how they're feeling. I know I often use myself as an example. I'm in recovery myself. I used to be addicted to alcohol and drugs. And when I first stepped into recovery, I only had two emotional states. I was either okay or I was angry. Now, there was a reason why that anger was there, because anger is, for me, it's a secondary emotion that's used as a coping mechanism for any underlying emotions that we don't know how to deal with. So a part of the work that I do, a big part of the work that I do, is starting to build that emotional awareness for people so that you can understand where those emotions are taking you, both cognitively and behaviorally. Because we've got automatic reactions that happen when we're experiencing certain emotions that are based on our previous experiences with those emotions. So, for example, if we're feeling really sad and we're not sure how to deal with that sadness, we're not even aware that it's sadness, there's going to be a thought process that's associated with that, and then a behavioral reaction that kicks in order to try to deal with it. Sometimes that behavioral reaction can be to get angry, to get frustrated, to start holding resentment for people, in order to try to cope with that sadness that's underneath the surface. So just really starting to build your awareness for what those emotions are, like what are the things that you're experiencing, how are you feeling about things, and developing your ability to talk that through with people, right? It's really important to be able to talk about how you're feeling, where those emotions are coming from, so that you can start to recognize them. So, if there's a frustration that's creeping in for you, developing the ability to talk about it with somebody so that you can get to what the underlying emotion is. Because frustration is just it's a mild form of anger. So usually if there's a frustration there's something else that's underneath the surface. So, maybe there's some disappointment, maybe there's some sadness, maybe there's some disgust, or something like that that's happening underneath the surface. You might be dealing with parents that have built up this expectation that everybody's, going back into all of these programs. And then if there's a fallback on it, parents might be dealing with some guilt around that. Maybe I shouldn't have built that up. Maybe I shouldn't have had that expectation there. And if that guilt's there, then the coping mechanism for that might be to get angry with the system and start lashing out at that, right? So we just need to be aware of building that awareness for what the emotions are underneath the surface, so that we can be ready for them as they start to build, and develop the ability to talk about them in order to process that emotion rather than reacting to it.
So,
Wow.
very good answer, very good question. I just wanted to go build upon that. I'm not a parent. I know both of you have children, and I want to ask this question for you. As you're going through this as a parent, not as obviously the social connectivation, what you do, and of course being a certified counselor, Stephen, as a parent, there must be mixed emotions as you let your little ones go out the door, or big ones out the door, with the fact that you're elated. Oh my God, I got time to myself, which you're being selfish. Let's be honest. I'm sure some parents are thinking that. I know you mentioned it, Stephen.
Thanks.
I get excited because my wife's going to work. I can go back up to bed and sleep for a bit. But realistically, there's got to be this mixed emotion of being happy for the child, happy for you to get some of your space back. But then there's got to be this other side. And you mentioned a little bit about guilt, but forget the guilt. What about the anxiety and the stress that comes from, you said earlier, Stephen, you've got a job, you're trying to, put the family together, you're doing all these things, your wife, it's got to be very, very anxious times. I'd love to hear first you, Stephen, then Pete, love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, I think for me, so when we start talking about anxiety, I tend to relate to anxiety as just another form of fear. We become afraid of something playing out. We become anxious about the way that things may progress in a situation when we don't actually know the way that those things are going to play out. So anytime we're dealing with anxiety, we want to be careful that for me personally, I want to be careful that I'm not projecting a possible outcome that hasn't happened yet. Right. So if I'm afraid of something playing out in the future, that's going to impact me now. And if I'm starting to connect the dots to that piece playing out the way that it is, the way that I think it's going to be, rather, it's going to impact me now when that thing actually hasn't played out. So the anxiety that I'm aware of for me is, what about when they're in those situations? My kids, you talk about big ones and little ones. My oldest is 15, my middle one is 9, she'll be 10 in March. My little guy just turned 7. So, I've got the full range from the teenager down to the little one. So, I'm concerned about there is no vaccination for them right now. They're going into those social circumstances again. What about if there's something that gets transmitted in that environment, bringing that back into the house? Both my wife and I are both double vaccinated. So, we're okay with it. But for me, the fear, and I'm still kind of cautious about that in social circumstances, is revolving around the kids and not necessarily around me. So from my point of view, it's being aware that I'm not projecting something that hasn't happened and living in the emotion that's associated with that thing right now.
Yeah, and I'm going to share a story that I was in a conversation with a friend of mine today, and I have a 7-year-old as well, Stephen, and ultimately I can only relate to the situation that we're in, and frankly, other than the fear and being a little anxious around who he connects with and how often, even going to hockey and who it is. But I had a friend share something with me today, and I thought this was really powerful, and love to get your perspective on it. And his daughter was going to first-year university this year. She hasn't been in class. She hasn't been with her friends for nearly a year and a half.
Yeah.
As he dropped her off at university to go into residence, he said, I'm still dropping somebody in grade 10, grade 11. And he said she hasn't had the opportunity to develop the social skills that when I think back to grade 11 and 12, and even in my time, grade 13, those were so important years for us to develop. So as he dropped her off, he said the first day, he dropped off Saturday, Sunday she was fine, Monday he got the call, and she wasn't in a good place.
Yeah.
And how many parents, as much as Gouche was talking about, the excitement of the separation and everybody can go back to living their lives, what about the anxiety that parents are feeling as they drop their kids off that may not be fully prepared for the situation that we find ourselves in? And it's nobody's fault. That's the unfortunate part here. It's a reality, but what can we say to those people to say, hey, here's maybe some things, whether it's to the student or whether it's to the parent, here's some things that you might be able to do to help each other through these times?
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, right? I mean, people, especially children, it's such a prominent age for them to have to go through something like this when it's, this is the time in their life where they're developing those social skills, where they're able to, they're building these opinions about themselves, about other people, about what life is in general, and they're starting to create their beliefs about themselves and other people in life as well. So it's really important that they do experience those social situations in school where they're starting to be around people their own age. And you're right, like for the last 18 months, for a lot of kids, that has been completely shut off. So that social development has been stunted significantly, I think, for a lot of people, particularly in areas of learning how to communicate with each other, learning how to connect with each other. And there's going to be a lot of anxiety. I know my little guy who's 7, when I was talking to him about it, he seemed a little bit apprehensive. I mean, he hasn't said that there's anything there for him, but I'm very aware of that because he's only been interacting with his sisters. right? So now he's going back into these social circumstances, and he's got to learn how to interact with his friends again, with people that he hasn't seen for a long time, with new people, and he's not been exposed to that meeting new people and getting used to it. So what happens is we become what's called experientially avoidant. So because we're not experiencing those things, we're learning that avoiding them keeps us away from the emotion. So if there's some anxiety around social interactions and meeting with people, because we've been away for that from the last 18 months, now we've learned that, well, when we avoid it, we don't experience that emotion. So there's going to be a tendency when we go into those circumstances for that emotion to go up, that anxiety to increase, and the desire behaviorally to walk away and avoid it, right? Which leads to more social isolation, which actually ramps up the problem. So it's kind of like it's a vicious cycle that people get stuck into. It's a fantastic point for us to be aware of.
It's one of those things. In one of our infographic, every Friday on the GenWell social media pages, we put out an infographic that gives people tips, tools, and ideas. And one of the things on re-entering the social world was just get started, because the longer we're out of it, baby steps, whether that's a coffee with a friend or a neighbor, or even an extended family member that you have comfort with, and obviously doing it socially distant or using the proper protocols. But whatever it takes, we all just need to get started and get back into it, because it can be a challenge. That first step can be a doozy.
Well, we're starting tomorrow night. Pete, you don't know it.
I'm coming.
At 6 o'clock tomorrow night, we're going to the Bottom Line to get started. Just social distance. We're going to follow all the rules. And what's important, I know Stephen's going to make plans and going to be there. It looks like October the 2nd, we are going to bring Oktoberfest to you at the Bottom Line. Because if you haven't been to Oktoberfest, it's going to close the bar, the patio downtown for my buddy Wayne Kelly. He needs the support, so we're going to give him that support. Before you answer or make a comment, Stephen, I want to just change gears here really quickly. And then, Pete, we're going to get into some of those social infographics. I know Stephen's going to be able to, we could be here all night listening to him. So I want to get to this point, and then we'll get right into, obviously, the social connection and what that means. Is there stress and anxiety that comes with it? You said just get started. Well, Pete, Steve, Carrie Goulet, I don't think we have a problem getting started. But there are those people. So here's something I heard on the radio yesterday. In a time like this where we're dealing with isolation, is it better to be an introvert where you're used to this, or an extrovert? And the answer that I got from this counselor yesterday on the radio, I was dumbfounded by it. Before I give you the answer that they said, I'd love to hear your thoughts, Stephen. When we're dealing with the isolation and the uncertainty, if you're an introvert, you hold back and you're not socially connecting, so we don't really have the same ability. What's worse, or what's better, or are they both the same?
Yeah, for me, just based on the way that I look at that stuff, I think introverted or extroverted, it really just depends on what that person's life experiences have been up until that point. Introverted or extroverted for me is a nature that somebody is born with. It's a part of our temperament that's innate when we come out. It's not something that we develop. It's something that that comes with us naturally. We're either introverted or extroverted. There's lots of different natures that people can be born with. But then it depends on the experiences that somebody has had in their life as they move through their life, which that nature will then influence the way that you relate to those experiences, that will dictate how you relate to this particular kind of situation now emotionally. So somebody that's introverted may be really comfortable with this, right? They may, if they've had experiences in their life where their childhood needs were met in a very healthy way, they may not have a problem being alone. They may be fine with the isolation because they feel pretty self-assured about who they are. But also you can have people who are introverted who those childhood needs have not been met. So when they come into these circumstances where they've been isolated in this way, now there's a whole bunch of meaning that gets associated with the fact that they're alone. Is there meaning around themselves? Is it, there's something wrong with me? That's why this isolation is playing out this way. So it really does depend on what their experiences have been throughout their life as to how they relate to themselves and other people inside of this situation. And that's the same when you're talking about people who are extroverted too. You can have people that are extroverted, but if they've got self-esteem issues underneath the surface, isolation, self-esteem, sorry, that's a huge umbrella term that can take on a lot of things, but
arrogance.
If they're very extroverted, but that's masking underneath the surface that there's a lot of self-doubt. In isolation, that self-doubt will come to the forefront, right? Whereas somebody who's very extroverted that doesn't have that self-doubt is going to relate to these kind of situations very differently. So it really does depend on what their life experience is, how their childhood needs were met going into these situations, as to how they're going to relate to it moving forward, in my opinion.
So this expert on the radio yesterday stated that people would automatically say that introverts would be comfortable in this situation because, and she quoted a number, a percentage, and the percentage was so the other way. She said extroverts are able, they've got so many friends and they're dealing with so many, they may not be all 10 or 15 friends, but they still stay in contact with 2 or 3 of them. Whereas an introvert finds it very difficult to even open up to the 1 or 2 that they're dealing with. So I found that really interesting. Pete.
Yeah, I think Stephen's comments are spot on. And I think even in listening to Stephen, I recognize that there's a spectrum for everybody. I had a conversation with an introvert, a self-proclaimed introvert early on in the pandemic, who said he was very comfortable being an introvert as long as he had the option to go out and connect when he wanted, where he wanted.
Right.
But the pandemic took it away from him.
That's a good point.
And that lack of connectivity, or the opportunity to connect, was what created the anxiety with him about connection. And so I don't think it's just a simple introvert extrovert conversation anymore. There's so many complexities. And on the other side with the extrovert, let's think about an extrovert who may have been part of his extroversion might have been the fact that he worked in a workplace where he went to every day and he had 100 people around him that were part of his team. I might even put myself in that from a past life where I was fully surrounded, engaged 10, 12 hours a day working in a workplace. And the minute you leave that job, or in the case of COVID, you were forced to work from home, where maybe you hadn't focused on those relationships quite the way you should have. Now you wake up and that extrovert, to Stephen's comment, just in regards to that's the facade, that's the face that we put on when we go out into the workplace. Now we don't have that anymore. And so I think it could affect different people in different ways. And again, the opportunity to build connections and educating, Canadians, people around the world, hey, don't always lean on one set of connections, whether it's work or family or relationships or friends. It's like what you want is to have a good mix of all those, so that if one door closes, other opportunities open up to stay connected and build those relationships.
And those people may be going through their own issues. So you're I'm relying on Stephen to help me, and I give Stephen a call, but he's just lost his job. And so his focus is not going to be on my needs. And so that can certainly send you down the wrong path. Just before we get into the social connection, the final part I want to ask you, Stephen, is how do we deal with this stress and anxiety with this 4th wave? We hear it's coming. We all thought a couple of months ago, God, this is great, euphoric. We're going to go into this fall with real positivity. The rinks are going to open up. You and I, Pete, know how important that is for us as beer leaguers. Kids are going to go back to school. It just seems we're moving forward. Now this variant is, ravaging the world. Sydney's closed. New Zealand's having issues. We've seen what's going on in Europe right now. I don't even want to bring up the States because that in itself is just a mess. How do we deal with this now? Because every time we've asked people, okay, we're out of it. I've dealt with the stress. Thank you for giving me these tips. And now I'm euphoric, and now I'm brought back down. And then I'm brought back up. Enough about the pivoting. We are not quarterbacks in the NFL. I feel like I'm Tom Brady and could play for the Minnesota Vikings. Give us I know it's a difficult answer for you, but what if you're in this position and the 4th wave is coming? What are some tips that we can play upon to help us through these dark or even gray times?
My answer is going to be very similar to the answer that I've given before around these kind of questions, and I think it's going to play nicely into what Pete's going to talk about as well. The most important thing when we're dealing with anxiety issues is the ability to talk about them. right? To be able to recognize that we've got these feelings, we've got this anxiety. And again, I always relate anxiety. It's it's another form of fear for me. And when we're talking about stress, what we're talking about in there is basically emotional overwhelm. So when we become emotionally overwhelmed and we try to suppress that and we try to push it down, it just keeps building and building and building, and it takes you to a place where you cross what's called a distress tolerance threshold. So you can no longer tolerate the kind of distress that you're under, and that's when we're talking about being emotionally overwhelmed. When you cross that threshold, your mind starts to go into places that it wouldn't go into when you're underneath that threshold. So you can start to become very reactionary to things. You're not thinking things through rationally and logically. You can become overwhelmed by things like anger. This is when substance abuse will kick in. Trying to numb those feelings, trying to get away from that experience as best as you can, because you're not thinking things through clearly. So it's really important to be able to discuss the amount of anxiety, the kind of fears that you've got with somebody that's going to hear you out, that's going to be able to listen to you. And we've said a number of times on this show when I've been on here that you don't have to be a therapist to have a therapeutic conversation. So it's really important to be able to have that support structure around you, the people around you that you can talk to about the things that you're afraid of, about the things that you're struggling with. Be vulnerable inside of those conversations, because in order to make connection with somebody, it really requires empathy and vulnerability. So if we're trying to create those connections, if we're trying to deal with the anxieties, the fears, the sadness, the loneliness that we might be experiencing in these situations, the best way to deal with it is to develop those social connections, to be able to talk to people, whether that's done through organizations like Gemwell, or if that's done through therapy, or if that's just done through connecting with friends that you haven't spoken to in a while, people that you feel that you can be vulnerable with. There's many different avenues that you can explore when it comes to that stuff. Talking about your emotions and talking about the way that you feel is only going to be beneficial for you.
Yeah, Stephen, it's so hard. Honestly, it's so great listening to you as a professional in the space. I'm by no means a professional. I see human connection through the lens of, hey, I know it makes me happier and healthier, and I've looked at the research and understand it. But to hear you say it, and I love the way you put it, that, again, you don't need to be a therapist to be therapeutic. And even if we do have counseling, which I have a coach, so I speak to her every other week, whether it's counseling, coach, psychotherapy, it's all part of setting us up for success. And I think the important thing for people to understand, and we have people in the connected family. You can't be talking to your counselor 24 hours a day,
Right.
7 days a week.
Right.
What we all need to recognize is that we need to find those other people who can be part of our support network. And also part of the message of the Genwell Project is, those that are struggling, it's too easy for us to say, hey, I'm fine. If you need me, call me. And I think we talked about this maybe the last time you were on the show. A big part of what we can all do is recognize that some people may be struggling, whether it's COVID, whether it's divorce, whether it's job loss, financial pressure, kid pressures, that each of us can pick up the phone and call those people, because those people may not have the energy or the ability to pick up the phone today.
Yeah.
And your call may make all the difference in the world. So it's not always about those in tough times reaching out. Right. Oftentimes it can be us who can be making a difference. So
yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Pete.
Hey, listen, I do want to add, it's my own motto. The best medicine for people is people. And it's exactly what you do, Stephen, and of course yourself, Pete. Listen, I can tell you that I've been obviously listening to a lot of people with what I do with the concussions and a lot of the athletes that are dealing. It is a lot bigger than what we think, guys, with guys that we feel are really strong that are breaking down. And I just hope and pray that we come through this somewhat unscathed. And thank God we have you, Stephen and Pete, to help lead the way. Listen, I wanted to obviously get into the connection part just as we wrap this up. And Stephen, please, we would love to have you back on a regular basis. You are so good. You're almost calming. Like for me, I go through a day that's ridiculous. As Pete knows, I'm one of those guys that, I'm global. I got people talking to me from every country. You know, I just got off the phone with a guy in Wuhan, China, believe it or not, and we were having a discussion on what's going on with ice hockey over there. I love my life, but there with those come challenges, and that's why I really love listening to you guys talk, because it makes sense and it gives me a little bit of validation to do what I do. So I want to thank you both for that. Now, Pete, I'm going to pull up some of these infographics, and I love them. I love what you do, and I think Stephen can really build upon some of these great ones that you've put out here. Obviously, the General Project, the Human Connection Movement. Here's a great one.
Yeah. Hey, Stephen, as I think you know, I shared an email with you earlier today. Yeah. We did the Canadian Social Connection Survey, and I think it's the first of its kind in the sense that it was a population base. We didn't go to a specific set of people, and I think it's really powerful for all of us as individuals, as psychotherapists, as everything, to validate what, you know, a lot of the research shows. Building community and connection can make all the difference in the world. But also identifying some of those marginalized communities like this one that certainly struggle, you know, in building and maintaining those relationships.
Yeah, 100%. I think the key word in there for me is understanding the loneliness aspect of it. I think for me, in the work that I do, particularly dealing with people who are dealing with addictive lifestyles, so they've been addicted to substances or process, and they're trying to step into recovery now. I would say one of the most dominant things that we find underneath the surface is this almost inner child that's extremely lonely, and just trying to, you know, that comes from a unmet childhood needs. So trying to meet those needs socially in ways that can often be problematic, but all stemming from this inner belief that you know, that I'm lonely, that there's something wrong with me, that there's this general loneliness that's sitting at the core, that's been around since childhood. So to see some of the stuff that you sent me today when I was reading through it, it was extremely powerful, particularly given the work that I do, and looking at things from that point of view, from trying to uncover this lonely child that's underneath the surface in the vast majority of people that I work with, and then finding ways to allow that child to kind of flourish and blossom out into the adult life that's being experienced by the clients that I'm working with, so that the burden of that loneliness can be relieved. So, like, the stuff that you sent me today was incredibly powerful, I thought.
Yeah. I'll bring up the next one in a second. You're watching Wellness Wednesday with Pete Bombaci, of course, brought to you by the good people at Gouche Live Productions, and of course, the Genwell Project, and now a great partnership with Fired Up Network, so we can get this message out to more people. I want to obviously bring up the next slide, or your infographic. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one. And if you've got the other one there, Gooch, it also speaks to people who have poor rated mental health and the connection to loneliness, because that probably is even more relevant to the work that Stephen does.
Yeah. So, Pete, as you know, I'm not the greatest producer of the show. I gave my producer Jordan the night off because I just thought it was three guys hanging out, you know, like Five Guys Burger. This is Three Guys Wellness Wednesday. So I'm going to see if I can. Let's see how I do here.
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so, and I can actually, I think if I can think back to the numbers, I think that's another one we should talk about, but it's over a 500% increase in people that have a mental health issue.
I do not have that one, I apologize.
That say that they're lonely. And I think that really connects, you know, I think I think it's a cause and effect question, Stephen. You know, do you have a mental health issue that makes you lonely, or are you lonely and that creates the mental health issue? You know, I'm not sure if you have I know you have a perspective on that one, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on the connection between those two.
Yeah, for me, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of situation. Just going back to what I was saying before, the way that I work with people is really starting to build an understanding for the individual around what's happening underneath the surface, right? So when we're talking about addiction issues, for example, the addiction itself is a solution to the problem. It's not the problem itself. So when we're working with somebody who's got, you know, alcohol issues or something like that, The alcohol use is basically the solution for what the underlying issue is. And a lot of the time, what we find that underlying issue to be, not every time, but what a lot of the time, what we find is this loneliness that's at the core. And that particular loneliness creates a void internally. And then people spend time trying to fill that void with external things. So those external things can be, I always call it the next shiny thing syndrome. So it's like, the new cell phone, the new car, the new house, the new relationship, things like that, all designed trying to fill this inner void that's created as a result of unmet childhood needs that cause this loneliness to start to come up inside. And then the person's inability to deal with that leads into these mental health issues, leads into addiction issues, leads into behavioral things that are basically done to try to cope with the emotions that are associated with that void, right? And that void is that loneliness that we're speaking about that was created really at an early age.
So, Stephen, sorry, Gooch.
No worries.
Earlier on, you said people aren't aware of how they're feeling.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important comment for us to just kind of touch on a little bit longer, because I do believe that, I only in the last year and a half leading this campaign for 5 years have recognized I've been lonely many times in my life. And I've seen doctors for different aspects of how I tried to cope with that loneliness. But no doctor has ever even mentioned the word loneliness.
Yeah.
And so, when we talk about the consciousness of how we might be feeling and why is it that loneliness isn't something that, my doctors brought up to me? Why isn't it something that we talked about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and longer? Where's the miss? Where's the gap? Why is this all new to us?
Oh, Pete, I wish I had the answer to that question, my friend. I really do. When it comes to dealing with loneliness in general, it's something that that's been front and center for me for many years now, right? With the nature of the work that I do and the way that I work with people who are specifically dealing with addiction issues, let's say, I'm never looking at the addiction, because for me that's just symptom management. Right, the addiction is the symptom of the problem. It's like constantly giving somebody cough medicine for a cough and never looking at why the cough is there. Right, if they keep coming back with it. So when I'm looking at the issues that are underneath the surface, for me, what comes up in a lot of my clientele, not all of them, I don't want to paint everybody with the same brush, but for a lot of my clientele, what comes up is this loneliness and the fear of what that loneliness means. Right, so why am I so lonely? Is it because there's something wrong with me? If that's the case, then there's shame that's associated with that, right? So the emotions start to build, and then where the addiction comes in that's what numbs those emotions. So it's like, I can't cope with them. I'm really struggling with this. I feel lonely. I'm ashamed of why I'm lonely. I'm afraid of where this is going to take me, and I don't know how to deal with all those emotions. So I'm just going to use the substance in order to numb that sensation. But then people focus on the addiction, and they focus on the substance use, without really looking at what's going on underneath the surface, like what's the root cause of the problem, rather than focusing on the symptom of the problem.
Is part of that, Stephen, just that we're, as a society, built on dealing with the crisis, building with the issue instead of actually dealing with those root causes of things?
It's a lot of things are set up in a solution focused way. We're also as human beings, we're set up to be problem solvers. Yeah, right? We're fixers. That's what's made us the dominant species on the planet, is because we are problem solvers. We see a problem and we fix it. The issue with that is that your emotions aren't a problem, but we see them as a problem and we try to get rid of them. Whereas we can't get rid of them. We need to learn how to be with them. We need to learn how to experience them. We need to learn how to identify them rather than trying to get rid of them, which is where a lot of people fall into that problem solving kind of way of thinking. And that's what creates a lot of issues in those situations.
So I can actually validate what you just said, Stephen. Obviously, we know the history with my sister, and I tried to answer some of the questions after we lost her. And what you've done is just solidified some of the things I was thinking about sitting in the hospital. And I think I've mentioned to this before, and I think this is very important for people to understand. While my sister was passing, there was a nurse beside me, and I'm in tears crying. And this nurse says to me, "Don't feel, it's not your fault. She brought this on herself." And I'm thinking, wow, hang on a sec here. Bad timing, kid. But she didn't bring this on herself, because she spent millions of, and I'm going to say millions of dollars, flying all across North America, trying to find the right solution. And all they were doing is exactly what you were doing, trying to get her off alcohol, get her off drugs. But they forgot to do what exactly, she was lonely. There'll be times. There's a Donna McCarthy did a little film on her, and my sister's walking down the street, and she said her best friend became a bottle of vodka because she was lonely. And I think, gosh, I got goosebumps thinking about that. We have to get to the root of the problem, or the issues that are creating it. And those, the alcohol and the drugs are only morphing that. They're only masking it. And thank you for bringing that up, because it does validate my beautiful sister being lost with not being. We're just not, I don't think we're ready for it. I don't think we have enough expertise to understand what you've just said, Stephen. And that's why I love listening to you. I also wanted to comment on the shiny thing. As a kid, I was a shiny thing. I would be chasing I'd be like that cat when you had the little red light. So I'd be going from place to place. Now it's a carrot. In the pandemic, it's food. Like, I got to be honest with you. I know I'm not supposed to eat that extra bowl of popcorn or nibble on the chocolate, and I feel okay, but I eat. And obviously the consequences are what they are.
And hence the one sugar in the coffee now.
I've cut back. I'm at least to one sugar. But I doubled up the amount of coffee I drank. One more really important stat for Stephen to comment on. You've done such a marvelous job with doing these surveys and getting the consensus. I'd love to hear you present another one for Stephen to validate.
Are you pulling one up, or you just want me to speak to it? I guess the burnt out. Yeah. Hey. This is a big one, Stephen. I'm sure you recognize that as well. You know, oftentimes I think in the workplace, we think that the cause of burnout, and again, this is chicken and the egg, you know, the cause of burnout is timelines or budget or, you know, the size of a project and not enough manpower. But I don't think we've ever thought about loneliness as one of the key indicators, drivers. You know, I'm not sure which it is, but at the end of the day, if there's a 92% association between being burnt out and loneliness, I think we all need to start paying attention to the importance of not only the relationships with other people in the workplace, but actually building those healthy connections all around us as human beings, so that when things aren't going well in the workplace, that we have some other people to lean on. Yeah,
absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more, Pete. I tend to look at burnout as basically being emotional fatigue. You know, we're overwhelmed with the amount of emotion that we're experiencing, and you know, whether that's through stress, through anxiety, through loneliness, through you know, the sadness and the fear and the shame that's associated with that loneliness, the lack of vulnerability that we feel comfortable showing in social circumstances because we're afraid of the judgment and the criticism that might come with that. It all basically revolves around the emotional experience, and loneliness for a lot of people, not everybody, but is at the root cause of creating that void that's there, as I spoke about before. So burnout for me, which basically just leads to apathy, you know, that feeling of, oh, I really don't care, but underneath the surface, there's still all those emotions that are bubbling away. So just learning how to identify that. And I think what you're doing with the Genwell project and trying to connect people that way is going a really long way to try to build the awareness around how social interaction, how connecting with people can relieve that feeling of burnout, you know, can recharge those batteries. Because in my line of work, what we're always talking to people about is self-care. And a lot of people kind of roll their eyes when you talk about self-care because they think we're talking about taking a bath or, you know, going for a walk and things like that. But no, what we're talking about is discovering ways for you to recharge your batteries. And if that means, you know, going out for dinner with friends, if that means connecting with groups or with organizations that get you socially interacting with people, that get you out of the space that's causing that emotional overwhelm, like the more you can do that, the more self-care you're participating in. So hats off to you for the work that you do. I think it's really important that we continue to build that awareness for that social interaction in order to help relieve some of that loneliness that people are experiencing.
Yeah, it's funny, and Gooch, I hope you'll come up here because I think this is it's such an important conversation for us to recognize, and this is why the GenWell project is a societal level. We are a consumer-facing movement that's trying to get everybody to participate, and the reason why is because you and I, we can give people coaching to go get physically healthy, and they can go by themselves, and they can go for a walk, and they can go for a run or a bike ride. They can do, even from a mental health perspective. There's lots of things we can do, from mindfulness to gratitude to journaling to, but that still doesn't. And I posted something today on my Facebook page that just said social health will be the phrase that we use in the health community in 5 years. That will be a common phrase. Today, people don't speak about social health because we don't understand it. We haven't been educated on it.
Right.
But social health contributes to mental health. It isn't mental health. And I think there's a really important message, because what the difference between, eating well, I can give you a recipe and you can go to the store and buy healthy food. You can exercise on your own. You can do mindfulness practices on your own. But when we talk about social health, it takes two. At least somebody else has to engage with you. And if we can raise the consciousness of society to say, hey, we all play a role, all three of us, and I know we do it gladly and willingly and consciously. If all of us take time to have a longer conversation or engage in a conversation with a stranger, a friend, somebody at the grocery store, in the coffee line, wherever it is. Gooch, I know you talk to the server at Tim Hortons every time you go through the drive-through.
Because you always put 2 sugar. I say 1 sugar.
But every one of those conversations makes a difference. Whether it's a sense of belonging, whether it's a sense of connectedness, whether it's making people happier or less lonely, every one of them is having a positive impact. But we've created a world, often because of this thing, where we feel like either A, we're just too distracted, or B, we don't have the time, or the fear, as you've talked about many times tonight, Stephen, that fear of, oh, they don't want to talk to me, or I'm not good enough to talk to them. And what we all need to recognize is, hey, we are all in this together, and everybody puts their pants on one leg at a time. We all know that story. And I think this is why we want to create this societal movement, because we all can be part of the solution. And it is just about raising the consciousness. Most of us don't recognize the value of neighbors and friends and family and colleagues and classmates. And everyone from all of our research showed that every one of them gives different benefits. I love the fact, this is an interesting one. Knowing your neighbor does not guarantee that they'll make you happier.
Or you like them.
But it will reduce your sense of loneliness. And so, that's about waking up every morning and waving. It doesn't mean you have to build a deep, meaningful relationship, and it doesn't mean you're going to be high-fiving each other and spending Christmas together or whatever holiday, but knowing that they're there for you if you're ever in a tough moment, that means a lot. And I think educating people on that whole gambit of relationships and what it can do for us, I think will be really helpful as we move forward.
Amazing.
Well said. All right, Stephen, I know you're a very busy man. I want to let you get going, but the final part is, do I have the right, if somebody wants to reach out, is that where they can get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just shoot me an email at that email address. More than happy to answer any questions or engage in any conversation that you want about any kind of mental health or addiction, or even just to talk about how to deal with loneliness. More than happy to have those conversations.
I have never met you in person. I look forward to that day where we can sit down and have a Coke, a cup of coffee with no sugar and 3 milk, or we can just grab a pop, like a beer pop. And I really, 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 really want to thank you for what you do. You spent time tirelessly to help people. Stephen Morris, you are incredible. Thank you.
Thanks, Gouche. Really appreciate you having me on again. Really, I love coming on and talking about this stuff. I think the more that we can talk about it and build awareness for people, the better it is. So happy to do it anytime. But thanks, man.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Stephen. It's amazing.
So there's a great comment coming from Sam Trapolino. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on the show, but mostly the work you do. The way you explain things is so easy to follow and make those connections to our own struggles. Is there a professional like yourself or a group in Australia that you can recommend? If not, do you do video counseling? You can send the bill to Gooch. I will talk to, there are a couple of my friends in Australia that are struggling a little bit, and I know they've reached out before, so I will ask Stephen that question, because one of the things that we found, especially with Scott Holler, as I let you go too, Pete, I know you've got a young boy getting ready to go back to school if they haven't already started. And getting ready to play hockey. I'm excited, and I'm coming to one of the practices. I'm really looking forward to that. Scott Holler opened up concussion platforms, and they could do virtual assessments and virtual. And one of the things that he's been hearing from the people that he's talking to is not so much about the physical, mental help they're getting, but it's the listening, that they know they're not alone. And instead of just sending an email, they get to look the person in the eye one-on-one. And though it's only on a screen, it is fantastic. And I'm looking forward to obviously doing more of this. And Pete, thank you. I know we're going to be 8:00 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every Wednesday. I am working on a very special guests. My Uncle George, who wrote the book on Louis Riel and the Métis culture, and his beautiful wife, my Aunt Terry. I'm trying to get them on to talk about the trials and tribulations of the Métis and of course what's going on. And they're such wonderful people. They're in their 80s, so they've been a little bit quiet. I'm going on a Zoom call with my cousin, Tag. She's wonderful, and I hope to be able to announce that this week, that you and I, Pete, will have an opportunity to talk to these very special people.
Well, and I've got a bunch of people lining up right now, Gooch. We're going to start sharing more and more stories about people doing great work out there in the world, trying to help make the world a happier and healthier place. Because again, we can all help by giving each other support and creating meaning and purpose in our lives. But if we can find the people who are not only in need of it most, but people who are from all walks of life and understanding things that we may not be connected with in our own lives, but being exposed to other things that we can be supporting, then I think we're doing great work right here on the platform of Wellness Wednesday.
Breaking news. Gooch is going to go on the ice a couple times next week because I have been invited. I have to go out to Vancouver. That in itself, I'm going to have a chat with Stephen about me getting back on the plane. I know that a couple hours to Winnipeg is nothing, but a 5-hour flight to Vancouver. I've been asked to participate in a charity event, but I'm actually meeting people from China to talk about our Safe for Sports platform being developed in China, and they're in Vancouver. So it gives me an opportunity to do it. But I am going to play with this young man. His name is Norm Bowden. He is the original Winnipeg Jet. He was the first one to sign even before Bobby Hull. They're having a charity event. He must be 70-ish at this particular moment. And this kid here is going to play 3-on-3 in a pond hockey extravaganza. I hope I can keep up to the old fella.
That's awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And of course, I'll take pictures before the game, not after.
I love it, my friend. I know you'll be shooting the lights out when you're out there.
You and I have been on the ice. Hey, listen, Pete, thank you again for Wellness Wednesdays. It's fantastic. We will see you next week. Have a great weekend. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow night at our little soiree at the Bottom Line.
I love it, my friend. Take care of yourself.
See you, bud. Thank you.
Yeah, be well.
Love you. Well, there you go. Pete Bombaci and Stephen Morris. I really enjoyed that, and I look forward to bringing you so many great guests over this winter. If you need anything, please reach out. We are here 24/7, of course, for you. And if you need proper medical help, we are certainly there to guide you to the right people. And of course, mental issues, Stephen Morris is the man. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. I want to thank Fired Up Network for doing such a great job in spreading our message wider and farther around the world. You've been watching to Wellness Wednesday right here on Gouche Live Productions. Good night.